Hi everyone, this is William. This is the 1921 diary series. I've been doing these every other day, but I thought I would do one today because the house is quiet and because I want to not let the momentum slip that we've been building in this long 28th February diary entry. And in fact, I hadn't read ahead far enough because it's not one of the super long ones. As it turns out, we'll only have another session or two, at most three, but I doubt it, before we go back into the day-by-day diary entries, beginning with the 15th of February. So if you recall from yesterday, Dmitri is in quite a depressed mood with the approach of his departure, very imminent departure for Copenhagen. So I have a picture today that I love. This is another one of the My Now pictures that I have just a poor quality photocopy of, but I absolutely adore this picture. It's Dmitri with his son. Dmitri is not looking very well in this picture. He's looking quite unwell, in fact, but I'm convinced that his son, Paul, was just the end-all and be-all of his existence. And yeah, so it's a touching photograph. And unfortunately, they would be parted all too soon. And I wonder, I mentioned yesterday, I wonder what it would have been like, what he would have said about this 1921, February 28th diary entry if we had had a chance to talk to him about it when he was in his 40s and was about to leave for the sanatorium or was at the sanatorium. What he would have said was important about his life, and what he would have said the future possibly held for him, and if he clung to this idea of having still a role to play in Russia's future, not as the Tsar of Russia. He gave that up actually relatively early, as certain as he seems at this point in 1921. That aspiration and that sense of being fated to play that role is not going to even last out the year, I can tell you. So, but he didn't give up his idea of having a fate that was intertwined with Russia's, and having an important role to play in Russia. And, he had to look for other ways to realize that. But the question is, for me, in my novel, did he still hang on to that when he was at the sanatorium between 1939 and his death in March 1942? All right, so last time we stopped with this sentence, they want me and not Kirill. Why? So we'd had the long discussion about conscience being possibly the most crucial thing that Russia needed, and that the Russian people demanded a man of clear conscience, and presumably the emigres, the emigre monarchist circles were, Dmitri says, rejecting Kirill because of his clearly cloudy conscience. So let's see how we're going to answer this question, why. I should add that if Dmitri is taking different points of view within even the same paragraph, or at least within this section of the diaries, it's because he's really having a dialogue with himself, because who else can he talk it over with So he's having this internal dialogue. And okay, here is what he's writing about that question, why, in this new paragraph. Because Kirill's reputation is tarnished after his procession to the Duma in March. And my reputation is better? Really? After all, I was a participant in a murder! Exclamation point. But they still want me. The right-wingers, who sometimes even say that that December night was the beginning of the revolution, they want me. They still want me. Why? Because there's no one else. And because it's fated. So if I get married to a young lady who is completely respectable but non-royal, then that can't ruin my, well, let us say, career. The Russian emigres would growl, but there wouldn't be any other option, and they would soon forget it consciously and on purpose, just as they have forgotten or are trying to forget that December night. Naturally, I won't say anything to Marie-Louise before my departure from Copenhagen, but I'll let events run on for another year, until the autumn, let us say. And if by then there's no imminent return in sight, I will take my destiny in my own hands. There's one more reason why I'm sorry to leave Copenhagen. It's that I don't want to leave. It's that I don't want to return to Paris. I hate Parisian life. It's so disgusting to me that it defies belief. In England, my complete idleness was interrupted by frequent trips to the country, and so I could forget. They were an escape from inactivity, but now in Paris, my life is one of absolute idleness and frightful bother. And then there are all these Russians who just sit there and just squabble or rip into other people. No, it's just intolerable. Okay, so let's stop there. And you could say this is a person who's rather haunted. It maybe isn't going too far to say that, to use that word. Okay, let's go back up. And what is he haunted by? Well, the Russian emigres may be trying to forget that December night, but Dmitri hasn't forgotten it, and he's not going to forget it. And here he is, like our little 14-year-old and 15-year-old and 16-year-old. He is tapping into the part of himself that is very poetic, that could have been a poet like his younger half-brother was a poet. And he's saying things like that December night, and the Russian emigres would growl. So, I like that so much about him. And I don't understand why people like the late, great Richard Pipes, who was the sort of preeminent American historian of Russia and who was at Harvard, says, well, I had a look at Dmitri's diaries and he was just a superficial person. All right, I guess you're reading a different set of diaries than what I was reading. So anyway, we have switched from a question of conscience to a question of reputation. Kirill's reputation is not good. It's tarnished. It's, apparently Dmitri believes permanently tarnished because of his march on the Duma in March 1917. But what about Dmitri's reputation? Well, here he's not using the word conscience, but it certainly is implicit. It's not just his reputation, is it? I was a participant in a murder! Exclamation point. He's not pulling his punches. Now, personally, I don't believe that he was the one who pulled the trigger, so to speak. I don't believe that he was the actual killer, but he certainly was a participant. He was certainly equally liable under the law. and he doesn't pull his punches about that. But they still want me, he says, and it's amazing because it's the right wingers who want him, or at least Trepov wasn't a right winger, but at least yeah, okay, you could say the conservatives. He does say right wingers. He doesn't consider himself a right winger, but he's getting overtures from them and from the ones in Germany, as we will still see, soon see, sorry. And yet they themselves have interpreted the assassination of Rasputin as the beginning of the revolution. And in fact, their bête noire, Alexander Kerensky, who became the head of the provisional government after the first revolution, the February Revolution, actually made a speech to the St. Petersburg or the Petrograd Soviet of Workers and Soldiers Deputies, in which he tried to sell them on Dmitri. He tried to defend Dmitri for whatever reason, because he didn't want Dmitri to return immediately to Petrograd, and told him that the time was not right for that. But he was telling these workers and soldiers deputies in the Soviet that Dmitri was, and I quote, the first man to fight against Tsarism. And that, of course, is absolutely absurd. And he wasn't talking about the whole history of Tsarism in Russia. He was referring specifically to the Russian Revolution. So in effect saying that Dmitri and the other conspirators were the ones who launched it. So even though there was a right-wing Duma deputy involved in that assassination, the right-wingers still, some of them still looked upon it as what had precipitated the Nicholas II's abdication and the revolution itself. And yet Dmitri marvels they still want me. And he just can't figure it out, really. I mean, he's okay. So he's falling back on this idea of fate. He's not saying, because I'm such a wonderful person, and I would be another Peter the Great, or I would be a great leader of Russia. He's saying, firstly, there's no one else. And secondly, because it is fated. It is destiny. It is written, so to speak. Okay, so, you know, at the core of all of this are two things, of course: that he doesn't want to go back to Paris, and that he wants to get married to Marie-Louise. So he's reassuring himself again. It's like one person in this dialogue is saying, no, you absolutely must not marry this non-royal young woman. And the other person is chiming in and saying, no, it's all right, old boy. It's all right. It can't ruin things. It can't ruin your career. The emigres are going to grumble about it. But where are they going to go? They don't have another option. None of the other Grand Dukes are acceptable. So, for various reasons, Nikolai Nikolaevich isn't interested, and he's too old. Andrei and Boris Vladimirovich have both married their mistresses. So it comes down to either Kirill and Dmitri, and they are rejecting Kirill. So, yeah, that's it. They have me. They don't have anybody else. And for that reason, they're going to just do their best to forget. They've already forgotten that December night, or they're trying to. And they certainly are going to forget this minor sin of marrying a non-royal person. So he doesn't want to lead Marie-Louise on. So whether it's fair for him to leave without, I mean, she knows he's leaving. He's not just getting on a train and leaving and not telling her. But he's not giving her any notion of how interested he is in possibly marrying her. You remember how he didn't even want to tell us He didn't even want to tell the future of the readers of his future diaries. He didn't even want to jinx it or go against his conscience by saying that when he first brought up the fact that he'd met this wonderful woman and that he would like to marry her, he qualified it by saying all these things about, I shouldn't be saying this, I shouldn't be saying this, it's stupid of me to be saying this. So he's certainly not going to say anything to her. And I guess, although, she probably had some inkling, and it was probably rather painful for her to have him leave without saying anything, I guess it was the right thing to do. At least he was following his conscience because he didn't want to lead her on, and things were far from settled. So he's going to give it until autumn. Well, what happens in autumn? Aha, yes, he turns 30. This occurrence that he's so much dating or dreading. So he's going to wait until he's going to wait until autumn and make up his mind, and it's all going to be based on whether there is the possibility or the probability of an imminent return to Russia. I don't know what he thinks is going to happen between February and September, October, but I don't think he has anything specific in mind because, the White Russian troops have all departed now. That's over. The Russian Civil War is over. But, he's a big believer in fate, and he's willing to wait that long. And if it doesn't turn out that way, then he writes in English, I will take my destiny in my own hands. All right, this gives him a sense of purpose, a sense of being an active participant in this whole big drama and not a superfluous person who's just sitting with his hands folded and doing nothing because he can do nothing. Okay, so now we hear how absolutely painful, how disgusting it is, he says. It's so disgusting it defies belief, this idea of going back to Paris. And the reason is, according to him, that he just hates being so idle. And you know what? I believe him. As you know, the bone I have to pick with him is that he's not doing what he could be doing in relation to the refugee situation with Russia. But for whatever reason, he doesn't see that. He doesn't see that there's anything he could or should be doing there. And so he's living in idleness. I guess, putting myself into his head, I guess it's because he is thinking, he's so focused on this idea of being the Tsar in waiting and having this intelligence, this information bureau, and having these meetings, these weekly meetings and conferences with other emigres to have a strategy for how they're going to get back to Russia and what they're going to do when they get there. And that's what he sees his role as being. But on the other hand, it's not good enough, is it? Because he himself is complaining about this complete idleness. And in Paris, unlike in England, he actually is getting together. He's going to these weekly meetings of the Trepov group, and, he's got people coming to his flat in the morning to discuss, to strategize, and he didn't have that in England. But for whatever reason, he feels much more superfluous and idle and useless in Paris than he did in England. And maybe the Marlings had something to do with that, because he kind of felt like he was, he had a family there. So maybe, but, he informs us then that his frequent trips to the country allowed him to forget all this frustration and superfluousness. And indeed, he was popular in London. He got lots of invitations, and he was invited to house parties for the weekend in the country, and they kept him busy. And in Paris, he has French friends, but his friends in Paris don't seem to be inviting him to their chateau or anything like that. So he's also lonely. And he's also doing things like, going to brothels and sort of succumbing to that temptation, as he has informed us in previous diary entries. And he doesn't like that. He is a man who has a conscience, and he really, really doesn't like that about himself. And there is going to be a reckoning, actually, in diary entries to come. He has not gone to confession since before the revolution, and he is building toward doing that. But right now, he's kind of a little bit tormented by things both outside of himself and his own conscience. So, when I use the word bother for when he says my life is one of absolute idleness and frightful bother, and what he means by bother is busyness. There's all this constant hustle and bustle. There are invitations, there are things to do, but they're not satisfying things. It's just a lot of hustle and bustle for nothing. Okay, and then he's so unhappy with the emigres with whom he's getting together because they just sit around and fight. They fight, and they're mean, and they rip into people. Well, he himself is going to be the main man on the chopping block in not too very long. I'm sure he was not above criticism. I mean, look at how he's talking about Kirill and how, he himself is behaving in relation to Andrei and Kirill, and he's not above criticism. But from his perspective, and let's face it, we're all this way, he sees the people around him behaving this way, and he's horrified by it, and it's intolerable. And okay, let's leave it there. We're going into some, we're not going to lose our intensity for the remainder or at least for the next diary section of 1928, until we go back to Paris. So I hope you are enjoying this, and as much as I am, and you're really getting to the depth of who this man was as a human being. And come back next time. I hope to see you then. Bye.